Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of A Conversation with Cometan. This is episode 13 now of season 3. I'm really excited today to be presenting to you the next lecture in the Year of Predissemination lecture series. Today, I'm coming to you with a lecture that is on a topic that's very central to Astronism, but is something that I've only really kind of touched upon in other lectures, not really kind of gone kind of in a deep dive into really. And that is Cosmocentrism, which is, of course, the official worldview of Astronism. I've spoken about this a lot, but I've never done a dedicated lecture to this topic. So I thought that as part of season 3, I would do this. Of course, we've just we've just got over the mid-season break, and so now we're in the second half of this season 3. I hope you guys are enjoying it, and everyone who's watching, I hope that it's been a good season so far for you, and I know I've enjoyed making these videos so far. And so anyway, let's get on with today's lecture. So Cosmocentrism, the worldview of Astronism. Now, of course, as part of section 1 and as part of any type of lecture on a specific topic like this, I think it's firstly important to define what we mean by cosmocentrism. And in many of the cases that we speak about in terms of terms, Astronist terms, there's sort of the Astronist definition of those terms, and then there is the non-Astronist definition of terms. And so that's what I want to do in this first section, is to define cosmocentrism as how Astronists see it, and then how it's been used in other ways by other people. So, of course, beginning with the Astronist definition, we have this idea that cosmocentrism is a kind of worldview. Now, if you don't know what a worldview is, it is kind of a collection of very basic ideas, really. It's an understanding of the world, of course, external reality, and the way that we as individuals, or as a species, or as a particular group, interact with that external reality. And of course, later on in this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at 2 sort of main categories or types or kinds of worldviews. That will be a little bit later on. So cosmocentrism is a kind of way of understanding the world and our place within it, okay? And it places obviously from the word itself, you can understand that it places a central focus on the astronomical world, on the cosmos, on everything extraterrestrial, okay? That is the central basic idea of cosmocentrism. But of course, it's a lot more depthful than that when we begin to open it up a little bit and we say, well, outer space provides purpose and context to both individual and collective human existence. What do we mean by that? Well, outer space tells us why we're here. It tells us how we can interact with the world. It is a place for us to attach emotions, receive knowledge from, but also have beliefs about in terms of the future. So outer space for cosmocentrist people is, and of course Astronists, is a place that has relevance for both for the past, the present, and the future of humankind, both for individuals and for the collective. So in terms of this cosmocentricity being pervading throughout all of Astronism, we have this temporal centricity, this temporal idea that through time, space is central, that it's because of space that we are here, events taking place in the astronomical world that we are here, which is very different from kind of a biblical cosmology, which of course has a sort of centered on the earth and humanity as being sort of the most important places and people, whereas in the cosmocentric understanding of existence, of course, the more scientific, you could say, approach is taken, where we look at things like the Big Bang taking effect and how that has created the reality that we are right now, the material reality that we, and the physical reality that we exist within. So outer space, from the cosmocentric worldview perspective, provides purpose in terms of course, through Astronism, we have the idea of transcension, which we'll come to a little bit later on. And then of course, we have this idea of it provides context. Outer space and its exploration, understanding the astronomical world in a better way, in a clearer way, will help us to understand why we are here, where we're going, and why we exist at all. So cosmocentrism really, and we'll get onto this a little bit later, it provides various different functions within astronism and provides various different functions for and utilities for astronists themselves. Cosmocentrism also is a kind of, like I've written there, astronomical model, and it's also a school of thought. It places the Earth, and therefore humanity itself, in an insignificant and oftentimes kind of subservient position in the broader cosmos. Of course, because the cosmos itself is considered central, that then that kind of diminishes a little bit, not completely, but it diminishes somewhat the importance of the Earth and the importance of humanity, because we see what is beyond Earth to be more important than Earth itself. Of course, Earth is important. We're not saying that Earth isn't important, but when we look at it from the cosmocentric perspective, if you resided on another planet on the other side of the Milky Way, you wouldn't even know that Earth exists, or you wouldn't even certainly know that there exists life on Earth, as obviously we understand. So I think that the Earth is important and has been important in religion and belief only because we thought for many thousands of years that the Earth, that the sun revolved around the Earth, and that the Earth was alone, and obviously that has then developed with the modern astronomy, and we've understood that there are other planets, and then beyond that we've understood that there are galaxies, and then we've understood beyond that there are possibly, trillions of galaxies, maybe probably more than trillions, really. So what we have to understand about the cosmocentric perspective is that it is a difficult thing to try to accept. And I struggled with this for a while, this idea that, if I died today, or even if the Earth died, even if the Earth was destroyed or somehow disappeared today, the cosmos would continue. And that is the reality. And I think in many ways, the cosmocentric perspective is the truth in terms of it is the most realistic understanding of existence. We aren't particularly important to the functioning of the cosmos. We are one species on one planet in one solar system of millions and billions of solar systems in the galaxy. So that is a hard pill to swallow, though. It's not an easy pill to swallow, but it's something that you have to do. It's something that I kind of call the cosmocentric obstacle, or it's kind of a little bit humbling as well, though. It has many different functions for the person. It's very humbling. It's very bringing you down to size type of idea, that you aren't the be all and end all, as someone would put it in layman's terms. So it's got this interesting capacity to, in a way that the theocentrism doesn't do. You'd think that theocentrism would do that. And we're going to have a look at the other worldviews later on, but you would think it would do that, wouldn't you? You'd think that placing your focus on God diminishes your own your own role. And I suppose in some religions it does, but at the same time, particularly in Christianity, we have this idea that God loves you, and we have this sort of personalism, don't we, in Christianity and similar religions, where there's that sort of deep connection between God and humanity, and you kind of don't really get that as much in cosmocentrism. There are developing ideas that may be akin to that, but I think that cosmocentrism, as it stands right now, in its initial formation as a worldview, is very much kind of literalistic and very kind of well, the cosmos exists, you're a very small part of it, put up with it, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So I think that even though in many respects the cosmos is in sort of traditional understanding is a kind of lesser entity, it is a created entity in terms of its relations to God, it in a way it has kind of even more of that harsher, prickly outer edges where, you know, you kind of just have to accept that this is your place in a very vastly huge universe. So this is just the beginning of what the cosmocentric worldview is trying to establish in people's mentalities. It's probably going to take a long time because it isn't something that is easy to kind of implant, because it's kind of something that is kind of, like I said before, you know, it's kind of a little bit depressing, maybe even for some people. You know, some people want to feel important, and again, this is why this is why the idea of transcension has been developed within Astronism, to try and bring again back this importance to humanity, that we do have a role in the cosmos, that yes, we may be minute and insignificant and subservient to the cosmos, but ultimately, yes, we do still have a role to play, and we could improve our importance in the cosmos, you know, and there is that capacity for that. So that's quite interesting, and that's why, of course, transcension is such a central dogma now to Astronism. So moving on, the cosmocentric worldview means to really approach a series of ethical and existential topics in a way that extends central importance to the cosmos and matters that affect outer space. And that is kind of in a more practical and also kind of in a theoretical sense as well, in both a theoretical and practical sense. This is how we apply cosmocentrism. So when we're thinking about topics like the meaning of life, which is an existential topic, for a cosmocentric and of course person and for astronists, the cosmos takes a central role in determining what the meaning of life is. Okay, so that's how you can see how the cosmocentric perspective is being applied. And this in many ways often contravenes the anthropocentric worldview, in terms of, you know, humanity is important, but humanity is not unique. And yes, we have a role, we have a job to do, we have a destiny in the cosmos, but there are others as well, and the cosmos doesn't serve us, we serve the cosmos type of idea. So that kind of contravenes in many ways kind of the anthropocentric worldview. So this approach and the way that we apply cosmocentrism can be qualified in many ways by an exocentric perspective, which is that humanity, as I've said just now, is one of many species in the cosmos, which is, again, has multiple functions. This has the function of reiterating humanity's insignificance, but it also has the function of reiterating humanity's distinct qualities. You know, the fact that, okay, we may not be unique, our uniquity is denied, our uniqueness is denied, but we still possess distinct qualities from other sentient creatures on this planet and other planets. We still have evolved uniquely. We still have evolved in a way that other species haven't. And we've got this scope, which is really important, of course. So again, we're bringing in soteriological language here, language about salvation and eschatology, and it all relates to that. And a little bit later on, I'll be showing how the cosmocentric worldview has influenced these other branches of Astronist religion and belief. But hopefully now you've kind of got a better understanding of the Astronist definition of the cosmocentric worldview. Although some degree of importance, of course, is extended to humanity, and we've said this in terms of the endeavour of transcension, we're not held to be unique. And so if we fail in this aspect of our existence, if we don't sort of go ahead and go towards transcension, that's a shame. That means that our destiny will not be fulfilled, but the cosmos will go on. And that's what I kind of love about cosmocentrism in that way, is that, and this transcend and this pervades the sort of attitude that Astronism takes to aversion to transcension and aversion to Astronist beliefs, is the idea that, well, the cosmos will still continue. So whether you believe in transcension or not, whether we do achieve transcension one day or not, the cosmos will continue and things will happen. The cosmos will end, for example. The cosmos is a limited entity. It will end. The earth will be swallowed up by the sun. These things we know will happen from the brilliance of scientific astronomy, which has in many ways influenced Astronist beliefs and has carved out and shaped and influenced Astronist beliefs in many ways. The cosmos will go on. That is the principle of cosmocentrism, really. And kind of, again, is this humbling of humanity. Fine, humanity, you don't want to believe in cosmocentrism. You don't want to see the cosmos as important. You want to see yourself or something else as important, whether that be God or animals or technology. But the cosmos will continue despite that, and the wheels in motion that exist that order the cosmos and allow it to function, those will continue no matter what you believe. So there's kind of that unstoppability. I don't know if that's a word. I think it is a word. There's that unstoppable nature of the cosmos that I think that's really influenced the cosmocentric worldview in many ways. Cosmocentrism detaches, therefore, the fate of humanity as a single species from the fate of the cosmos itself. In many biblical cosmologies, the end of the world, which of course is interpreted now as the end of humanity specifically, kind of was interpreted in a way as the end of the cosmos itself, the end of existence itself. When we look at Christian theology, when it speaks about the end of the world, well, that's the end of our world, but it's not the end of other worlds. It's kind of interesting. There's that disconnect for me between that sort of older language of Christian eschatology and sort of what we know about the nature of the cosmos now and the vastness of it, and that there exists many other worlds in the cosmos populated with other species, both below our intelligence and above our own intelligence. So again, I think some of that language in some of these other religions eschatologies needs to be updated in many ways and defined. What are you talking about here? Are you talking about the end of the earth? Are you talking about the end of humanity? Or are you talking about the end of the cosmos as a whole? And I sort of put that out there to the Catholic Church and other religions to try to specify that. So cosmocentrism detaches the fate of humanity from the fate of the cosmos. If humanity chooses a particular path that does not fulfill its greater scope and potential, which is of course what Astronism wants it to be able to do, if it doesn't do that, that's not really going to affect the cosmos. It's only going to affect humanity. It may affect the Earth to some degree, depending on the kind of path future that we choose, but it's not going to affect the cosmos as a whole. The cosmos is too vast for us to make any real significant changes and influences on it. So again, it detaches the two and makes the fate of humanity subservient to the fate of the cosmos. Even if we reach transcension and this sort of state of transcension that I describe, the cosmos will still end. What we have to accept as a species, as a singular species with a finite amount of time, knowledge, and capacity, is that we are subject to cosmic laws. We are subject to the fate of the cosmos, not the other way around. And I think in some of the worldviews, that's kind of misinterpreted, particularly in things like Christianity, where God is made man. God can then, and in a way, man can then control the fate of what takes place. No, there is things that are going to happen no matter what. The cosmos will end no matter what. The universe will collapse no matter what. And we have to use the time that we have here to get to a position where we fulfill as much of that potential as we can. We don't have to do that. And this again is where we come into the astrosoteriology. And that's why I've said there, much of the cosmocentric worldview has had significant implications for how the astroeschatology and the astrosoteriology have developed. Okay. So just moving slightly away from some of those more in-depth theological and theoretical aspects of cosmocentrism for a second, we just need to address what I call the claiming of cosmocentrism. So from the outset of Astronism's founding and the outset of the Astronist era, cosmocentrism has been adopted by the Astronist institution as its official worldview. And this, of course, has pervaded through to the official worldview of Astronism as a whole and the official worldview of the Astronist community. Okay. For this reason, cosmocentrism is presented and promoted by the institution. And of course, a lot of the work that I do and that the institution does is to try to explain what cosmocentrism is, to try and promote this worldview. Of course, this is why I'm doing this lecture here today as part of the Conversation with Cometan series. And of course, it's trying to also distinguish astronism from other religions and other belief systems in a very fundamental way. We don't share your worldview, we have our own. And I think that kind of initial, and it's not to do that in terms of, you know, you and us, it's not to divide people, it is to distinguish how we see the world in different ways in order to try and facilitate better understanding. You know, if we promote cosmocentrism and allow other communities and religions to understand where we're coming from, then there'll be better overall interactions between us. So what is being centered on in cosmocentrism is what we call the astronomical world. And I use that phrase a lot now. Of course, that refers to all different sort of extraterrestrial phenomena, okay? Whether that be animate or inanimate, whether that's alive or not alive, okay? But there are other branches, and we're going to come to these, I think, in section 3, where we have sort of a focus on space exploration, which is what we call spatiocentrism. We also have transcension as a focus, which is what we call analypsocentrism. I think I will have addressed that in a couple of episodes back as part of season 3. This idea that transcension is the central endeavour of humanity. Again, this is a form or branch of cosmocentrism. And then also a focus on extraterrestrial life specifically, whether that be sapient, sentient, above our intelligence, below our intelligence, all these different variations. That's what we call either xenocentrism or exocentrism, okay? So there are these different branches of cosmocentrism that deal with specific areas, because cosmocentrism is a very kind of broad worldview in the sense, because it's talking about the astronomical world as a whole. Well, there's many different branches of the astronomical world. There's many different areas of the astronomical world, many different ways that we can interact with the astronomical world. So I think that in defining these different branches, what we do is better understanding of cosmocentrism as a whole. I just wanted to put there as well, just quickly, that in many ways, the Astronist endeavour of salvation, which is, of course, what we call transcension, emerged as a result of cosmocentrism. And I really do think that. I think that the idea that salvation is achieved through outer space, that the astronomical world has salvific capacities, is certainly, you can see where that has come from. It has come from the cosmocentric perspective, the idea that, yes, the cosmos is the most important thing. So of course, it's only logical that the cosmos would possess that capacity to bring about salvation, okay? So we've got Astronism and the Astronist. So this is the main point really for this slide, is that Astronism and the Astronist institution and I myself claim cosmocentrism as our own. This is a controversial act for some in the community, but we're putting it out there anyway. Astronism was the first belief system to assert cosmocentrism as its official worldview. That is totally true, because yes, and I'm going to speak about this a little bit later, but there's been many other religions that have had astronomical themes, definitely, but they've never made that step to make that sort of official proclamation of cosmocentrism as the official worldview. And that's what Astronism was the first to do. And that was what the Astronist community was the first to do. So Astronism, therefore, and the Astronist institution, therefore, makes a claim to cosmocentrism. Of course, that could be disputed. It probably will be, but it still stands, and that's what we call the cosmocentric claim of the Astronist institution, that cosmocentrism is ours. You don't have to ask permission to set up another religion and claim cosmocentrism for your own, but what you do need to acknowledge is that Astronism and the Astronist institution and I myself were the first to officially adopt this worldview in an official capacity. And that's the distinguishment there. It's in that official capacity. So also, it is for this reason that the Astronist institution classifies any individual who adopts a cosmocentric worldview, whether they know that that's cosmocentric or not is up to them, but anyone who sort of kind of exhibits cosmocentric characteristics, we automatically classify them as Astronist. And that is probably the main, when I'm talking about the claiming of cosmocentrism, that's probably one of the main outcomes of that. When we are deciding who is an Astronist in the world, we as an institution go off of who has a cosmocentric worldview. Whether they self-identify as cosmocentric is another thing, and self-identifying Astronists are probably a lot smaller population, because the word Astronist and the word Astronism are less well known. But people who hold this sort of general worldview of cosmocentric are at this moment in time classified automatically as Astronists. So that's why when we are doing the demographics for Astronism, some people have claimed that when as part of the institution's annual demographics report, that I'm inflating those populations. Well, the populations that we come to, the figures that we come to, are based on alternative religious ideas, people with alternative philosophical outcomes, outlook, sorry, and a proportion of those will hold a cosmocentric worldview. Though a proportion of those may not self-identify as astronists, but they certainly hold a cosmocentric worldview, and so therefore they are officially classified as astronists by the Astronist institution. So there's a little bit of controversy there, and that's fine. There's always been controversies when it comes to religion and belief. But that is the official policy so far. But I don't want to go too far into that. I probably will make another video, maybe sometime in the future, kind of exploring Astronist demographics. I think that would be something that people would like to see at some point. So I'm going to run through these next couple of slides a little bit quicker, because basically what they're just doing is just clarifying the definitions of different terms that are related to cosmocentrism. We've got cosmocentrism spelt with a K, which sometimes we use kind of more, maybe in different languages might use that, you know, maybe in Russian they may use the K instead of the C. We've got cosmocentricity, cosmocentrically, cosmocentricism, cosmocentrist, non-cosmocentric, astrocosmocentric. So we've got all these great terms that are related to cosmocentrism. Please take a look at those definitions, just so then you're aware of them. Another slide here with some more of those terms: cosmocentralize, anti-cosmocentrism. Take a look at the definitions of those. Probably one of the most important is the one at the bottom, actually, on this slide, which is cosmocentrics, which is the study of cosmocentrism and cosmocentric belief. So now that we've come across, we've kind of covered the Astronist definitions of cosmocentrism, we can now look at the non-Astronist definitions of cosmocentrism. And of course, they're probably more than what I've actually put on this slide so far. But these are just ones that I've come across in my time so far. We've got the cosmist approach. We've got this idea of the cosmocentric ethic. We've got the IPBES definition. We've got the Lupus Sellers definition. Okay, so these are just some of the things that I've come across in my time, where I've, you know, come across some of these definitions online. You probably ought to find them quite easily. First of all, we've got, and definitely some of the Astronist definition definitely interacts with these, and they're not too far away from one another. So we've got the cosmist view on cosmocentrism. Human beings do not have their natural home on Earth. Rather, they are organisms whose ecosystem is more properly the whole cosmos. So we've got this idea that humans don't really belong here, that yes, the Earth is our home, but we are better suited, and maybe other places in the cosmos need us, would benefit us more if we went out there and explored the cosmos. So that's kind of the cosmist perspective on cosmocentrism. Very similar to Astronists. I think Astronists would agree with that. So there's kind of not much difference there, really. Then we've got the cosmocentric ethic. The natural state of the universe should be preserved without human attempts to terraform planets for human habitation. Now, Astronists tend to support the idea of terraforming. I'm half and half. I don't want to disrupt natural ecosystems that already exist. There is definitely major ethical issues there that I have addressed in the past, particularly in the Omnidoxy. I think I addressed those, and definitely more needs to be said about that. The cosmocentric ethic, though, I think is quite interesting, because I think it does kind of forget really that transcension is very important to Astronists, and that terraforming is part of maybe progressing transcension. So I think in that sense, those two definitions may butt heads in the future. that's a very interesting potential argument in the future that I think needs to be had soon in the Astronist community. We need to have those discussions now as to what should triumph. You know, should it be preserving these environments, or should it be transcension's more important? And definitely from the analypsocentric point of view, transcension would be more important. I think generally the Astronist perspective would be that transcension is more important, but also with, of course, ethical considerations for what is good terraforming and bad terraforming, of course. Then we've got the IPBS definition, which is that cosmocentrism is a vision of reality that places the highest importance or emphasis in the universe or nature. This is obviously in contradistinction to an anthropocentric vision, which of course strongly focuses on humankind as the most important element of existence. This is kind of a more broader definition. It does somewhat fit with the Astronist definition, but it is definitely more broad. It's still interesting and it's still there. And I like the idea of that kind of vision of reality. I do like that. I think that definitely resonates with me, and definitely corresponds to how Astronists see the cosmocentric worldview as a kind of vision of the future, if you will. And then we've got Lou Picella's definition, which is a lot more in depth, I would say, a lot more sort of technical. They state that cosmocentrism at its core makes the universe a priority in a worldview. And again, that's definitely astronistic. Teleological cosmocentrism, though, suggests that the universe has intrinsic directionality and perhaps an ultimate purpose. Again, that's really interesting. There, what Lou Picella has done is established a separate branch of cosmocentrism, sort of a branch of cosmocentrism that deals with causation and purpose. So very interesting there. Pantheism goes further by ascribing a kind of spirit or divinity to the universe. Again, what Lou Picella has done there is connected a cosmocentric worldview with pantheism as a whole, which generally Astronists wouldn't do. No, it generally wouldn't do that. I think what he's done there is he's tried to intertwine, or they, sorry, not he, they, he's tried to intertwine, they've tried to intertwine the theocentric perspective, the theocentric worldview with the cosmocentric worldview, and they've tried to see how those fit together, and they've come up with pantheism, which of course is certainly part of Astronism, part of the Astronist understanding of cosmocentrism, but probably isn't the focus. I think what Lou Picella has done there is that they have made cosmocentrism theocentric, and I don't really like that. So the Astronist perspective wouldn't really do that to it. It would explore how they interact, but it wouldn't define cosmocentrism in theistic terms. Do you know what I mean? So that's just some non-Astronist definitions or approaches to how to define cosmocentrism. So I kind of skipped that last slide very quickly, but we're on to section 2 now, which is essentially what I want to explore is the different roles of cosmocentrism. I've identified 3 roles so far for cosmocentrism in the Astronist belief system. These are orientation, identification, and navigation. Okay, these are functionalities, roles of cosmocentrism. Definitely, it's one of the responsibilities of cosmocentrics, which is the discipline that deals with cosmocentrism, to study and explore and explicate the theoretical foundations to cosmocentrism. Part of this theoretical background is exploring the different functions of cosmocentrism, understanding how cosmocentrism fits into Astronism and interacts with other beliefs within Astronism. So the first of these roles is orientation. So this is really important. Cosmocentrism possesses the function of giving astronism and astronists placing in the world. What I mean by that is that in the distinguished themes and values that cosmocentrism exudes, it gives a distinguishment. It distinguishes and makes distinct astronism from other belief systems, which is really important. We have to know how we differ from other belief systems in order to understand who we are and what our worldview is. So the cosmocentric worldview here really has this fundamental role of orienting astronism. And so without that kind of orientation, the identity of astronism wouldn't be able to then flourish. Another word that is also important here, two more words, is the idea of positioning and alignment. So aligning with certain values, aligning with certain beliefs, positioning in terms of how humanity exists in the cosmos, what is important in reality, you know, those types of things are what we call the process of orientation. Okay. Then we have this second role, which quickly follows on from the first, which is identification. So by orienting ourselves, by distinguishing how we are different from others, we then begin to establish our identity. Cosmocentrism's establishment as the official worldview of astronism, again, establishes the astronist identity, establishes the astronist community. This is us, that is you, okay? That is not done in a mean way. It's not done to cement any kind of, you know, division. It's done in order to establish our own distinct identity. Cosmocentrism provides astronists with a sense of identity in the world, as I've just said. And cosmocentrism really presents, but also represents astronism and astronists in the world. And again, this is another reason why the Astronist institution has claimed cosmocentrism and states that anyone who subscribes to cosmocentrism is automatically an astronist, because cosmocentrism presents and represents astronists in the world and kind of establishes as well the astronomical theme of the belief system, which again intertwines with the idea of identification, the establishment of the astronist identity. Finally, then we have this idea of navigation. So we've oriented ourselves in the world, we've established our identity. Now navigation comes into play. How are we going to direct ourselves in the world? Where are we going? And this is, again, the third and final role of cosmocentrism. Cosmocentrism sets out a particular future for humanity with the help, of course, of transcension, space exploration, the discovery of extraterrestrial life, things like that. That establishes a kind of future for humanity. It establishes a kind of navigation. Cosmocentrism provides the tools through new concept development and the development of ideas and practices and beliefs to navigate the course of astronism itself as a belief system, but also the individual lives of astronists, as well as the collective lives of all astronists in the world. Okay, so it has this sort of three-pronged function, okay? And this all is in aid of trying to establish and fulfill the goals of astronism. You know, astronism has a particular set of goals that it wants to be able to fulfill. And so cosmocentrism possesses sort of the function of planning, rooting out and executing the course to transcension and these are the main astronist ideals. It has that function of being able to do that, being able to navigate the world cosmocentrically is really important for all astronists to do. So with that section, we kind of tried to establish why really cosmocentrism is important and try to come to some sort of understanding of its function in astronism. Now we'll move on to section 3, which of course looks at the components of cosmocentrism. So earlier on, I spoke about that there are different branches of cosmocentrism, that we have the idea that cosmocentrism, because it's such a broad worldview, that it kind of focuses on the astronomical world as a whole. There are many different aspects to the astronomical world. These different aspects then constitute the different branches of cosmocentrism. And I've identified six. I've identified six branches here. The first, as you can read, is Astrocentrism, which focuses on sort of political and social focus on the astronomical world. So that is things like economic, cultural aspects of the astronomical world and how those things interact. And that's what we call astrocentrism. We've got astrobiocentrism, which is used in the sort of scientific community to refer to extraterrestrial life, particularly the search for that. So, of course, that means placing a focus on that endeavour. Then we've got exocentrism, which is not the focus on searching for extraterrestrial life. It is the focus on the study of extraterrestrial life itself and the existence of that and the prospective speculations as to what that would mean if there does exist extraterrestrial life or if there isn't extraterrestrial life. Okay, so again, the exocentric point of view and the astrobiocentric point of view kind of interact. I think that the astrobiocentric point of view doesn't make the assumption that there exists extraterrestrial life. I think that's the main difference, whereas the exocentrism point of view goes a bit further to say, well, it assumes that there is extraterrestrial life. It has that belief that there is, okay? Then we move on to very much sort of core astronist branches, which are analypsocentric or analypsocentrism, which focuses on the salvific endeavour of transcension. Of course, this is probably the most important branch of cosmocentrism for astronism itself. Then we have this idea of futurocentrism, which developed out of my understanding that astronism was a futurocentric religion, that it focused on and was oriented on what will happen in the future, specifically regarding salvation, rather than what happened in the past. So you've got things like the distinction between astronism in terms of salvation is yet to happen, and then Christianity, where salvation happened 2,000 years ago with the events in the life of Jesus Christ. So again, there's a difference there, and one religion is focusing on the past and things that happened in the past, that salvation has already been brought about, whereas or the tools for salvation, I should say more specifically, have been brought about. And then you've got on the other end, you've got astronism, where we have the tools, but we've still not brought about salvation. Salvation is not guaranteed, okay? And so again, salvation is for the future, okay? So that's where the futurocentric point of view has a kind of influence really on the development of astronism. Then we have spatiocentrism, which focuses on space exploration and the development of civilizations in outer space, which again is distinguished from the prior branches, because this is specifically focusing on how we're going to do that, how we're going to build societies on these on the different spacecraft or on different planets, on different celestial bodies. Okay, so we've got these different branches of cosmocentrism. They all have their own unique kind of characteristics, but again, they all share the cosmocentric worldview. Now, in my study for this lecture, I really wanted to include a worldview theory, at least one. We've actually come up with another one. I think it's a bit later on. The first is what I call the Apostolical Criteria. Okay, this is a 6 elements theory that a worldview must, according to this scholar, must fulfill. Okay. and you can read those 6 elements there. I'm not going to go through them because we're going to go through them on the next slide and how cosmocentrism fulfills those, whether it does or not. But I think what this just shows you is that there is still so much more to do in the worldview field, where we need to try to understand in different ways. This is a great criteria, it's a great framework, but I think there are things that are missing. And I think that, as time goes on, hopefully more research will be done into this area. So the first of Apostel's criteria is that a worldview should have an explanation of the world. Now, cosmocentrism does have that, and actually it relies a lot on scientific terms and scientific knowledge, really, for how the cosmos came to be, rather than relying on kind of heavily relying on a theological understanding. That doesn't mean that cosmocentrism is atheistic. It can be atheistic, but it can also be theistic, okay? But it does certainly acknowledge the Big Bang, of course, which, of course, biblical cosmology doesn't as a worldview. I don't think, no, it doesn't. I was going to say maybe biblical cosmology and the church do acknowledge the Big Bang today, but it doesn't really mix well, really. No, the two things don't really kind of mix well. But cosmocentrism does, and that's the most important thing, that cosmocentrism does acknowledge that, but it also has its own ideas as well. And it says that the evolution of an ordered, limited cosmic reality took place, in which the evolution of humanity took place, and of which that was a minute part of this sort of broader cosmic evolution. So you've got the Astronist cosmology here playing an important role in developing sort of how the cosmocentric explanation of the world was established. And a lot of this was addressed in the Omnidoxy. Some of it probably will be addressed in the upcoming Astrodoxy. I think I've made a place for that to be discussed, but I think that a lot of it was actually addressed in the Omnidoxy, the foundations of it anyway. So there, we've got an explanation of the world and why we're here, and, using those kind of scientific terms, really, embracing those scientific understandings of the world definitely is very important to the cosmocentric worldview. We also have then the second element, the second criteria, which is really this idea that cosmocentrism fixates on outer space and its exploration, particularly is based on the intertwinement of salvation with outer space, because, of course, there needs to be this idea of there existing a purpose, a definitive reason as to why we're here. So we've understood the explanation of the world explains why we're here, but it doesn't give a particular purpose. And I think that's what the second criteria really tries to establish. And of course, through Astronism, we do that through transcension, developing this idea of transcension, developing also other Astronist practices as well, and astronality, mastering that, achieving astrosis, achieving cosmosis. Some of these eschatological things start coming in as well. So it's not just soteriological, it's not just about salvation, it's about other aspects as well. And then finally, for this slide, we've got the third aspect of a worldview, which is what to do. So what is righteous? What is right? What is wrong? Cosmocentrism, particularly when viewed from an Astronist perspective, establishes what we call the Analytical Ethic, which is whatever furthers transcension is right. Whatever furthers transcension or progresses transcension is equated with righteousness, okay? And then, of course, whatever regresses transcension is equated with immorality or wickedness, okay? So we've got this Analytical Ethic. So it's centered on this idea that transcension is good, and then anything that takes away from transcension is bad. Okay, so definitely cosmocentrism fulfills that criteria. Then we've got number 4, which kind of, I think, the way that cosmocentrism interprets the fourth criteria is to establish a way of achieving the goals of humanity that have been set out in the previous criteria. And the way, of course, that we do that through astronism is specifically through analypsology. How are we going to achieve transcension via the astronomical world? Well, we do that through what we call the sidereal economy, or the economy of transcension, which is the setting out and managing of humanity's struggle for transcension, humanity's expansion into the astronomical world, humanity's mastery of astronality, humanity's understanding of the astronomical world in ways that me sitting here right now, I would never be able to do, okay? So that's the development of transcension we can see there, hopefully, in the future. So yes, there is a definitive path that is set out for cosmocentrism through astronism, specifically through analypsology, okay? Then we've got this idea of the fifth one, which is what we could call the epistemological criteria, that, you know, a worldview needs to set out how it deals with knowledge, okay? We have two sort of branches here of how we deal with knowledge in astronism, in cosmocentrism specifically, that essentially cosmocentrism, by virtue of its focus on the astronomical world, establishes the notion of afflation. Now, afflation is a complex idea, really, but it states that through a spiritual, emotional, specifically astronal, and physical connection to the astronomical world, knowledge is produced. Okay, so knowledge is produced, knowledge is interpreted, knowledge is gained through the astronomical world. That's not to say that knowledge can't be gained elsewhere, but the astronomical world is the most important, and that's where the centric element comes in, the most important, the focus, the most important source of knowledge, okay? Which sets the foundations for what we call the inspired religions rather than the revealed religions. Astronism is an inspired religion. It's not a revealed religion. It's not a revealed religion. It is an inspired religion because it's based on this idea of afflation. Okay, I'm going to do more explanation of what that is probably in a future episode on Astronist epistemology. But then just really quickly, the second part of this criteria is that cosmocentrism has this idea of what we call analyticism, that transcension specifically is a valuable source of knowledge. So that states that not only is the astronomical world a source of knowledge, but that transcension, the endeavour of transcension, humanity's exploration of space, is also a valuable source of knowledge. And that's, again, where we can gain knowledge, and how we deal with knowledge is filtered through transcension, okay? In a similar way to how ethics are filtered through transcension. You know, the idea that what is right and wrong is determined according to what progresses transcension or not. Do you know what I mean? So it's the same kind of idea, that knowledge can be produced through the endeavour of transcension, okay? That's what we call analyticism, okay? Which is, again, part of the Astronist epistemology, part of the Astronist theory of knowledge. Then we have this final, quite interesting criteria from Apostel, which is that a worldview needs to sort of consider itself, its origins, criticize itself in many ways. This is why I've created the branch of cosmocentrism called metacosmocentrism. This is to deal with and to kind of create a framework, really, of how cosmocentrism can consider itself, how it can deal with itself, okay? Of course, the Astronist Institution and myself regard cosmocentrism to have first developed as a result of astronality, sort of 40,000 years ago as part of the enkindlement. but it's only through Astronism's proclamation of cosmocentrism that really began the sort of modern official, trying to think of another word for it, real, you could say, I don't know, maybe real development of cosmocentrism. I kind of intimated this bit earlier. Of course, there have been other theories, philosophies, and religions. Other people are going to say to me, well, there's loads of other religions that have had a cosmocentric worldview. Well, yes, there are. I mean, I can list a few in my head now. I can list many. You know, a lot of the astral cults of ancient Egypt probably had cosmocentric understandings of the world. Of course, they were integrated with things like paganism, but of course we consider them part of the astronic tradition. But Astronism, I still say, and this is true, Astronism is the first belief system to officially adopt cosmocentrism, to explicitly say that cosmocentrism is its worldview, and to develop cosmocentrism. Things like that I've been saying to you in this lecture have not been developed earlier, because these are from me. These are from Astronism. These have developed out of the Astronist belief system, so they couldn't have existed earlier. Of course, we have other groups in the past, through people like the Russian cosmists, who I love, but they didn't ever make a official proclamation or decree that cosmocentrism was their worldview. You could make that assumption from what they believed. And of course, I regard them to have taken a cosmocentric perspective, but they never really were organized enough to be able to do it in the way that the Astronist institution has done it. Okay, and that's the difference. Okay, so I think there is a little bit of controversy there, and I think it's just important to kind of clarify what I mean when I say that cosmocentrism does have very, very old origins with the astronic tradition, of course, but at the same time, its modern manifestation through Astronism is a more definitive and a more organized and more explicit version of this worldview. Okay. So the fourth and final section of this lecture is going to cover comparisons, and I've been speaking about this a little bit earlier on, comparing cosmocentrism with some of these other worldviews. So just take a moment just to read, while I just take a swig of my water here, just take a look at the list of those different worldviews. Of course, I've included cosmocentrism at the top there. So we've got theocentrism, biocentrism, we've got egocentrism, technocentrism. Right at the bottom there, we've got anthropocentrism. We've got all these different types of what we call centric worldviews, and they really do differ from the cosmocentric worldview, not just simply in what they focus on, but the beliefs that are integrated with them. Cosmocentrism doesn't act alone. You should now understand that with the development of cosmocentrism, other derivations have been made, other other products have been made, other beliefs have resulted from the development of cosmocentrism as a worldview. So, and that's the same for these other worldviews. Theocentrism has branched off with other beliefs. Do you know what I mean? So I think that when you read that one term, it's not just how cosmocentrism differs on what it focuses on, it also differs on the set of other beliefs that come with cosmocentrism as well. So a centric worldview, as I've written there, is any worldview that has a distinct theme or focus, and those that can either be a physical entity that is given that theme or focus, or it is an abstract one. And so of course, worldviews as well also have kind of similar functions to one another. You know, they provide a definitive focus and a definitive identity to the belief system and its community. They assign some physical entity or abstract entity or metaphysical entity with a sense of supreme importance, which again creates a hierarchy. You know, of course, in cosmocentric understanding, we've got the cosmos at the top, the astronomical world, then we have God, or we might have humanity, depending on your orientation. An atheistic astronist wouldn't obviously include God in that hierarchy, but an atheistic astronist would. So that, again, with the development of the centric worldviews, a hierarchy is made with what is at the top. Of course, for theocentrism, God is at the top, and maybe cosmos is at the bottom, maybe. And again, I think that can be subjective as to what that hierarchy includes and where all the different subjects fall. But definitely a hierarchy is created. And then we also have this idea that a centric worldview establishes a sense of placing in the world. And we've explored that through the three roles of cosmocentrism earlier on, which is to be oriented, identified, and then navigated. Okay. Then we come on to, so we've focused on sort of the centric worldviews. Then we have another category of worldviews, which is what we call the dimensional worldviews, which I've only included 5, including Astronism itself. One thing just to make clear, even though I've used a capital letter there for Astronism, when we're referring to Astronism as a worldview, especially as a dimensional worldview, it actually would be a lowercase a, okay? Because it's not referring to the belief system of Astronism, it's referring to a worldview. But that's a very technical point to make, just for people who are interested in sort of the linguistics and the sort of grammar that I've used and the spellings. Because sometimes people are, and I think, again, that's going to be another lecture that I will do, is sort of a grammatical and spelling and terminological lecture, maybe sometime in the future. But anyway, not getting off topic too far. So we've got these 5-dimensional worldviews. Sorry, 6. I've just realized there's postmodernism at the bottom. Sorry, 6-dimensional worldviews. Beginning with Astronism, I'm just going to read the highlighted, the bold parts, okay? Because those are the parts that are distinguished from one another. So we've got this idea in Astronism that the material and the immaterial aspects of reality converge in the astronomical world and diverge thereafter to be experienced by sapient life. So what I mean by that will become more clear as we look at these other ones. So we've got naturalism, which states that only the material aspects of reality exist. Then we've got pantheism, which states that only the spiritual aspects of reality exist. Then we've got theism, which states that the spiritual aspects of reality govern the material aspects. Then we've got spiritualism or spiritism, which states that the spiritual and material aspects of reality are intertwined, meaning each can communicate or otherwise engage with the other. Then we've got, finally, postmodernism, which states that reality is socially constructed. And from that, then other ideas can maybe emerge from that. Maybe that reality isn't real, or that reality doesn't exist is one view that could be taken from that. So just going back to the most important worldview there, which is Astronism, of course, for me, which is that the material and the immaterial aspects. So Astronism doesn't deny that the material and the immaterial exist, the physical and the metaphysical. Astronism accepts that there is a physical and a metaphysical aspect to reality. But what it does state, and again, this is where the cosmocentric elements come in, is that these converge through the astronomical world, that the astronomical world is the place, not God, not humanity, not the earth, not terrestrial nature, not any particular idea or concept, not anything else. It's through the astronomical world that these two material and immaterial aspects of reality converge and then diverge again, which then can be experienced by sapient life. And what I mean by that is things like astronality. The experience of the emotion of astronality is an example of a sapient being, a human being, for example, experiencing the material and the immaterial aspects. Engaging and practicing astronism is an example of that, okay? So there you can see how astronism as a worldview is very much oriented on the cosmocentric understanding of convergence and divergence, okay? So cosmocentrism is distinct, and these are just some of the final slides for this lecture that I just want to cover. That first of all, yes, there are other worldviews that have a focus on nature, and certainly cosmocentrism has interconnections with them. Things like ecocentrism definitely applies to cosmocentrism. Biocentrism applies to cosmocentrism. So these things do certainly interact with one another. But of course, the natural terrestrial world is what is the focus in these other belief systems, whereas cosmocentrism always wants to make itself distinct by saying that, no, we focus on astronomical nature, not terrestrial nature, okay? Then we have cosmocentrism as being sort of focusing on the astronomical nature, distinguished from, I've just said that, so I don't want to go over that, but, you know, distinguished from some of these pre-Astronist worldviews is basically what I'm trying to say. And then finally, there we've got cosmocentrism, which is distinctly cosmic, seeing in the astronomical world the most important place there is for human everything, human psyche, human spirit, human life, and human future, which is, of course, really important, as we discovered when we look at the future of centrism, when we were exploring that a little bit earlier on. So just as a final slide, really, just to kind of round off this understanding and exploration of cosmocentrism, 3 points. First, cosmocentrism influences every part of astronism. And so that's why its designation as the official worldview is really important. It's crucial. Number 2, it is not an understatement. Sorry, it is not an overstatement to suggest that astronism could not exist without cosmocentrism. I don't think it could. I think that really astronism is certainly dependent on cosmocentrism. If cosmocentrism isn't true or didn't exist, then I don't think astronism could as it does today. And so that's why cosmocentrism is classified actually as a dogma of the Astronist institution, by the Astronist institution. So it's quite interesting as well, this idea that actually cosmocentrism is what astronism is dependent on. And then finally, that cosmocentrism's influence pervades Astronist philosophy, astroeschatology, astrosoteriology, and of course, Astronist practices as well, which of course ultimately has nominal, practical, and theoretical consequences for the whole of astronism. So basically what I'm trying to say there in that third and final point is just trying to reiterate this idea that cosmocentrism really exists at the basis of astronism, and that it pervades all other aspects of astronism. And I think that has been really demonstrated in this lecture by the fact that I have sort of explored and had to refer to various different eschatological, soteriological, philosophical, and theological elements throughout this lecture. So that's the end of this lecture. Thank you for listening. I hope that now you've got a better understanding of the worldview of astronism. If you want to learn a little bit more, read more about cosmocentrism. There's loads of resources online that you can take a look at, both non-Astronist and Astronist resources. Also go to the Omnidoxy. The Omnidoxy would be a really great resource for you if you want to understand the Astronist perspective on cosmocentrism, specifically sort of cosmocentrism at work, really. The Omnidoxy is cosmocentrism at work, in a very philosophical and theological way as well. So if you want to take a look at that, go and have a look at that. The Omnidoxy is, you can pay for the Omnidoxy, but it is actually free online. So just take a look at it, type in cosmocentrism and just see where I've used it. Or if you're feeling more confident, just read the Omnidoxy and try and pick out how you interpret how I've used and how cosmocentrism has seeped into a lot of my writings. Finally, if you want to take a look at definitions, go and have a look at the Institutional Dictionary of Astronism that I'll have. Lots of definitions, all definitions of astronism currently are in there. And of course, there'll be definitions on cosmocentrism too. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I'll stop talking now and I will see you in episode 14 of A Conversation with Cometan. I really hope you're enjoying season 3 and I'll see you next time. So bye, everybody.